This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is November 20th, 2025.
I'm Scott Deluneboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield, with new glasses that you can't see in this audio medium. It's funny because my wife's health insurance, I learned, covers $300 for glasses, but not the eye exam that I had to pay for.
It's a weird little cutout from that.
Right? Anyway, at least it wasn't too bad. Help support our vision care, patreon.com/politicos. On today's show, David Eby and Mark Carney both survived the week, as does John Rustad, but once again, he's more bruised than ever. And we have a new economic plans and ideas coming from every which way. Let's dive into it. So, we teased the BC NDP convention last week, I think hoping for more drama than we got. And
we just wanted the content.
I know, right? I didn't need him to lose. Just like a little bit of blood would have been good for the show. Instead, David Eby gets an 82% on his leadership, or 82% are against holding a leadership review, which is a perfectly fine number. Yeah, it's a perfectly fine number. It's not bad.
It's adequate.
Yeah. It's not low enough to question his leadership. It's at the range where his inner circle should think about how to turn that around before the next one in a couple of years, but no rush.
Yeah, I think
don't overcorrect.
We're coming up on what? It's pretty much been exactly 3 years since he became premier, and adequate probably feels like the best description of that time. Not terrible, but not exactly knocking it out of the park either.
Yeah. So that works for him. Beyond that, a bunch of the government's priorities passed on the resolutions as they put on their own press release, cracking down on short-term rental violations, fighting the federal government for fair ferry fees, seeking public equity stakes to secure a return on investment for people, which is a vague-ass sounding resolution.
Wait, are they going to start shaking down companies for shares of them like the Trump administration's been doing?
I don't know. Or maybe they'll issue public shares in crown corporations like, I want to say Bill Bennett tried to do.
Yeah, when I was going through my...
I don't think they'll do that. That was a weird bit of history.
It was a weird bit of history. When I was going through my uncle's documents after he passed a couple of years back, we actually found a couple of those share certificates.
Cool. That is cool. I like that. People don't know what we're talking about, but I don't have a story up, so I can't dig into it for now. But beyond that, the NDP are also, they did adopt the expanding low-cost insurance products offered by ICBC. I don't know if that includes pet insurance. But sure. Defending the North Coast tanker ban. There's others they didn't mention on here. I know at least a ending funding for wealthy private schools passed, and I suspect a few other resolutions passed. But as we discussed, they're not bound by any of them.
Yeah, and are ultimately kind of meaningless because the government will do what the government wants to do.
Also notable is the preferred slate of the premier. Seems to have won the party exec, including Aman Singh as the new party president. So all around, Eby seems to have done the work getting the support from Labour and other factions within the NDP to keep dissent to under 1 in 5. So good for him. On the other side of the aisle, the Conservatives are not doing as well, as more riding associations have declared that they don't like John Rustad, and one has in fact dissolved entirely.
at this point, the whole thing just feels so rote. Like every week we're here talking about, the next batch of people who've come out and said Rustad needs to go. Honestly, the dissolving the writing association is the only thing that's kind of interesting at this point, because, I mean, how many times can you write the story of some people with some organizational role write a letter or come out and say something about John Rustad needing to resign?
So, specifically, the Esquimalt Coalwood Riding Association is no more. What did I say?
Coalwood.
Specifically, the Esquimalt Coalwood Riding Association has dissolved. The president, Jesus Christ, Christian McKay, has announced this because Christian has become the leader of the BC Christian Heritage Party. I only just realized his name is Christian, and it's very funny to me. It's
a real case of normative determinism coming to play right there.
He basically thinks the conservatives are too woke. They're not complaining about sexual orientation and gender identity issues enough. They're not complaining about the soji. That's the problem.
Oh, so like he's in a Esquimalt Coalwood. What's he gonna do? Like that's already writing that's would be real hard for the conservatives to win. Who thinks the Christian Heritage Party has a shot at that one, or is going to have any impact whatsoever?
Listen, in 2024, John Wilson for the Conservatives got 29.22% and just edged out the Greens' Camille Curry, who got 19.31%. So, like, that's a clear second place. The NDP took 51.5%, and prior to that, the riding didn't exist. It was divided up from a few others. But yeah, I think we talked last time, a few of these riding associations wrote letters that there's riding associations that are not necessary to listen to. There's the seats you already hold that you're never going to lose. There's the seats you're never going to win. And then there's the seats you need to win. This is in the never going to win situation. Or like if they're winning this, it's because it's 2001 again. And the NDP have just evaporated as a party. So, I don't know. Good luck, Mr. McKay, being the Christian leader of the Christian Heritage Party. You're going to get worse than the Conservatives in the next election. The party, I think, got...
Probably. I know. If the Rustad keeps dragging his heels on this one and just ends up bringing the party down around him, that might not actually be the case. He could BC Unite this one.
So, province-wide, we have 30 riding associations calling for caucus members to force his resignation. That's getting up there. Like, those are still grassroots kind of volunteers as opposed to direct MPs.
Well, the interesting MLAs thing... need to actually show some backbone and just do it themselves, force them out. Like, yeah, there's not a formal way to do about it, but you get all of them together, or even half of them going there. They can make it impossible for him to stay if they want that to be the case. But I don't know, we're seeing something very similar to what happened with the Liberals in Trudeau a year ago, where everybody knew it was untenable for him to go. There was a lot of discontent, and yet nobody in the caucus was actually willing to have, an ounce of political bravery and actually push him out. And you're seeing the same thing here.
Yeah, it's much more toxic in the Conservative Party at this point, as far as I can tell. We're seeing, little leaks from Jazz Johal and others to the media that caucus meetings are described as paranoia and vindictiveness on the part of Rustad and the people around him. The commentary I've seen from Rustad is that he does not admit any failures of his own, but he has started throwing everyone around him under the bus, including the party's executive director and others. So it's, You
mean the people that managed to bring the party from a nothing to one that almost won government.
No, John Rustad did that single-handedly, Scott, didn't you know?
John Rustad's not that talented.
Is it John Rustad who is wrong? No, it's literally everybody else in the party. It's funny, but it's also very sad, and not an effective way to run the official opposition in a province where the government has a razor-thin majority. They could be far more effective. So that's the Conservatives. The Independents also had their day. I'll link to a piece from Vaughn Palmer that points out that 1BC keeps introducing bills that they actually call for a vote at first reading, in which the NDP will happily vote down because their bills are racist as fuck, to put it minor, or transphobic or otherwise. The bills have included the Protecting Minors from Gender Transition Act, the Land Acknowledgement Prohibition Act, the New Resident Cost Recovery Act, the Property Rights Protection Act, the Post-Secondary Institution Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Prohibition Act, and today's Repeal Truth and Reconciliation Day Act.
Oof.
I don't think that's the exact name of it, but that's what she wanted to do, because in Dallas Brody's word, we did nothing wrong, we being settler colonialists. In fact, it was a good thing. So that bill was defeated with only 3 votes in favor of the bill, the 2-1BC and Jordan Keeley, the Conservatives, Green, Independents, and NDP all voted against it. So that's something. I also saw that a bill from the Conservatives to repeal, I believe it was from the Conservatives to repeal the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People Act was defeated, and Eleanor Sturko introduced a bill to repeal the section of that act that would require every bill before the legislature to be subject to Indigenous consultation, which was surprising for me to see come from her. I didn't think she'd pick that to focus on. I'm glad they're all focused on the issues.
Actually, I think it does something a little different than that. It's not the consultation part, at least according to the story here in the Surrey Now Leader. Unfortunately, the actual text of the bill is not up on the Ledge website yet, but it looks like it's taking aim at the provision in the Interpretation Act that basically requires judges to basically read all the laws of the province as being as consistent as possible with UNDRIP, and this is in response to the whole Cowichan decision, and I don't know, I want to see the actual bill, but from the sounds of the press release and what she's saying, it's more on we want to try and limit the application specifically when it interacts with private property concerns. So it'll be interesting to see what's in there, but it's maybe not quite as broad or as it might have sounded at first, and it's more defensible.
Yeah, it's not the same. I understand that, right? I just didn't think she would spend, she's only going to get a handful of private members' bills, and I'm kind of surprised that this is where she took hers, because I don't know if she's been as much of an outspoken critic of the Cowichan decision, for example, or otherwise, versus just public safety issues was the big thing she was on. I mean, she was the Solicitor General critic, but yeah, that was more where I was coming at. Is I didn't expect this bill from her. She wants to repeal Section 8.1 of the Interpretation Act, which says that every enactment or every law must be construed as upholding and not abrogating or derogating from Aboriginal rights and Treaty of Indigenous People as recognized and affirmed by Section 35 of the Constitution. Every every act and regulation must be construed as being consistent with the Declaration of Rights on Indigenous People.
Yeah, which came up in the decision because of how the judge read it, that as interacting with the Land Title Act. So in the fee simple section of the decision, that specific thing did factor into the decision making on it.
I mean, she can remove that section, but that doesn't kind of erase the complexities of land title issues in BC.
No, it doesn't erase the complexity. Yeah. It's more that it was a much broader judgment than has been generally rendered in the past, particularly the bit about Aboriginal title sitting above free simple and encumbering it, and that particular provision of the Interpretation Act was part of the justification for that more expansive part, and it may have, had that not been in there, it may have been more narrowly structured, the decision.
As for the rest of the situation, the 1BC stunts, like Vaughn Palmer's article is kind of framed around, the NDP are abusing their power to defeat bills at first reading, when usually it's a perfunctory, like, we don't necessarily agree with it, but it's worth debating kind of situation. And now, since David Eby has become premier, bills are regularly being killed. And it's like, we also didn't used to have bills like this being presented by MLAs, right? There'd be all kinds of different bills presented, but they were rarely so, like, deliberately inflammatory. And then, as he points out as well, it's 1BC calling for division and the recorded votes on them, which is just begging the Conservatives, well, it's begging the NDP to take a stand, which they will happily do, and it's trapping the Conservatives to say whether they're with 1BC or the NDP on different bills. And they have sat out a couple of these votes as well, which also helps the bill get defeated.
Yeah, because that's like the real play here, is try and put the Conservatives offside a lot of their base on some of these votes. I don't know how effective that's actually going to be. More interestingly, I'm going to be curious if, now that this convention has, started to weaken a bit, and there no longer has the same presidential value as before, next legislature, the one after that, when the party standings change and different parties running the show, are we going to see more private members' bills from across the spectrum get shot down at first reading?
Maybe. I think it's also worth remembering, like, we're in a new era in BC where private members' bills can actually move forward for the first time in possibly history, and some have. And we have seen NDP bills pass, or NDP backbencher bills pass, and we also saw a Conservative backbencher bill pass on mental health care for pre- and postnatal parents. Great stuff. Hard to disagree with supporting that, right? So, I mean, people using their private members bill for partisan point making, fine. Let it go to a vote. People bringing their bill, especially if you're an opposition member, where getting it passed requires getting the government on side. As long as there's still a path for some of those to come to debate, I don't really have a problem with the purity of the Westminster system letting some bills die at first reading. Cleans the order paper, I guess. But zooming out from the legislature, the BC government also had jobs on its mind this week. Coming out of his convention, David Eby released Look West, Jobs and Prosperity for a Stronger BC and Canada, the new economic and jobs plan that they have pulled together. And what is this, you may ask? Hard to say. It's kind of a collection of targets and goals for 3 to 10 years of how we will have an economy in the future and survive the changing world.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is things that have previously been announced or talked about or hinted at. So in that way, there's like not as much new. What this does seem to do is add some more structure to it and actually put numbers to some of the goals. Doubling of non-U.S. exports, growing the agricultural and food exports by 25%. Things like that, which are good to actually see real concrete targets in there. Because that's a real bad habit we have in Canada of making the announcement be the main thing and not actually caring as much about implementation. But by putting in a set of actual targets, there's, in theory, going to be more accountability on this. Well, I have to see if that actually pans out, but it's good that we're trying to, get to X percentage of whatever it is, rather than we're just spending this amount of money and, hopefully it works out.
Yeah, the strategy is centered around this pyramid that annoys me to no end of strengthening our workers on top, delivering major projects faster in the middle, things like energy and critical minerals it shows, and diversifying markets and growing targeted sectors on the bottom, with the sectors being maritime, life science, AI and quantum computing, aerospace, construction innovation, trade and logistics infrastructure, and agriculture and food processing. So, like you said, there's targets for 3 years. There's some money for training. There's some money for R&D development in some of those industries. There's highlights of the kinds of projects that they want to get going on. These aren't largely new announcements. As you mentioned, they tie back to like Bill 15 and our previous critical or priority projects, like the Red Chris mine expansion, for example, and the LNG plants.
North Coast transmission line features prominently in here.
$200 billion in major project investments in the next 10 years. We want to get 35% of federal defense contracts, and on and on. So I think that's why it kind of landed with a thud, because it's, I think you mentioned to me before the show, Rob Shaw was comparing it to some of like Christy Clark's jobs platforms that's, resource heavy, and the economy of BC is not going to suddenly become something very different than it is, I understand. And so all of these will kind of look similar enough. Kirk LaPointe criticizes it in the Victoria Times Colonist for being kind of like simultaneously too vague and ambitious, but also not having like the detailed structure to make things realistic in a realistic time frame. But also we need to transition our economy much faster. He does criticize the fact that like, how are you going to square Clean BC with this massive ramp up of LNG that you keep talking about? That's not been clarified to anyone. He points out there's very little discussion of small and medium enterprises and businesses in this.
Which is a fair point.
Yeah.
But that is actually a kind of glaring gap in an economic strategy.
And he points out that those kind of businesses can really benefit in a lot of different ways, whether through tax cuts or even things like investments in childcare and transit, so that people can get to their jobs simply.
Yeah, I also like some of the permitting regulations stuff too, because it's not the big businesses that are the most impacted by that. They have large teams of lawyers and compliance officers to deal with all of that. The burden of those sorts of policies really does fall on the small businesses that don't have the resources and the dedicated staff to actually focus on those sorts of things.
So overall, good to see a strategy. I'm not the expert enough to say if this is great or where it could be better, but I'm glad to see at least some people are starting to pick at it. I've been curious for more, LaPointe and some of the others come from more of a center-right position. I'm curious about the like union critiques or the center-left critiques. I know on the press release, they did the standard government thing when they launch something big and just rack up the quotes from ministers, from CEOs of food and beverage, association groups, First Nations, random small like quantum organization companies. BC Federation of Labor president is in here. The CEO of Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers is quoted in here. Lots of other comments endorsing it, basically. So they put the effort into rallying support for it, at least. Even if it was just a matter of like, hey, Vice President, Research Innovation of University in Victoria, what if we told you we'll give some money to research? Would you say something nice about us? And they're like, sure. I'm not saying it was so transactional, but some of it probably was.
Like the bit in here under the AI and quantum computers, that's just a bullet point on there of birthplace of quantum, which I'm pretty sure BC is not the birthplace of quantum in general. Although I do know some of the Japanese have been some of the quantum computer pioneers, but that just really stuck out to me.
Screw you, Richard Feynman.
Exactly. I feel like maybe a little stolen valor on BC's part to just claim all of quantum sciences were there. I also do like the fact that they are focusing on some of the expanding the port infrastructure and clearing up bottlenecks around the ports. That's going to be quite important because there are already issues around the rail and road access to the Port of Vancouver and capacity at the port to handle increased trade.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, I don't know. Overall, the thing's fine. You get to actually put some real numbers on the targets, but also, like, as a political matter, it feels a little underwhelming. And it would also be, I don't know, kind of nice to have, one or two key takeaways from this, whereas this just feels like, a 40-point plan with a whole lot of bullet points, which, yeah, you have a lot of moving pieces, and that is called for in many ways, but it's, if you were to just ask a regular person, what's the key takeaway here, or even just, ask the head of the civil service, what's like the one thing we're trying to get out of this? It's not entirely clear.
I'm even less concerned about that, and I'm just more thinking, okay, but what's the first thing, right? Like, what are the urgent things? I see a lot of 3-year targets and 10-year targets, but talk to me about the next 6 months, right? In the spring, we passed Bill 15 so urgently.
Well, they do.
And yet...
So at the back of it, they do break it down by short term, medium, and long term. And the short term is 2025 through 2026. So, yeah. Prioritize 18 major projects, North Coast transmission line. Partnering with the federal government on defense priorities is a little vague. Same thing with growing the innovation economy.
The most vague things are in the first short term and or things that have already been done, because they have already prioritized major projects, and they actually did just give that North Coast transmission line legislation royal assent this week. So the BC Hydro call for power projects is already announced in here. Like, there's a lot of announcements in the short term, not a lot of happening.
Now the other thing would be the concluding the mutual recognition agreement with the other provinces. That one they did also be checked off today.
Yep. We can touch on that now if you want. I mean, we were going to talk about it a little bit later, but basically the provinces have, signed their interprovincial trade barrier deal to recognize the sale of goods from one province to another. Except for food and alcohol, which require additional work.
And financial services. That was also in there, which is one of the weird quirks of the Constitution, that we end up with like just a bunch of provincial securities regulators, which is a crazy way to run a country.
To be fair, America has state-level criminal law.
That's actually more understandable than every state gets to have its own SEC that manages the stock issuances in that from that state.
Both are problematic in different ways. think we can agree.
Yeah. But yeah, circling back to this, it's good to finally have that done. I seem to remember a promise of this happening by Canada Day, which we seem to have overshot a little bit. But
did they say which Canada Day? It was implied 2025.
It's strongly implied that by Canada Day means the next Canada Day, not Canada Day 2073.
So we have an economic plan. We have the end of trade barriers, at least on
some of them
goods. Yeah.
So basically, long and the short of this is that if a product meets the requirements of another province, except food, alcohol, and financial services, you can sell it in any other province. Which, good. Weird that hasn't been the case already, but an important step on reducing the trade barriers.
They are planning to work on the food and alcohol barriers, so eventually you will be able to easily buy your, I don't know. What was it? Sourpuss is going to be building new factories in Canada, so you can get your sourpuss liqueurs easier.
I mean, I'll believe that when that happens. Several years back on the podcast, we were talking about, provinces going all the way to the Supreme Court to fight for their ability to basically be captive or monopolies when it comes to alcohol, even to the point of fining people for buying alcohol in a different province for personal and bring it home for personal consumption. We have a long way to go on that one.
Well, from targets in one document to abandoning targets elsewhere, BC has, I love government press release spin in the titles. BC is bringing in measures to support EV adoption, auto sector, while awaiting federal decision. But really, we are giving up on our EV sales targets, noting that the people aren't buying as many because it's complicated. It has nothing to do with the fact we got rid of our rebates, but automakers are struggling to sell their EVs, and so we're going to let them a little bit off the hook. We're going to introduce a new bill next year to retool our targets. It's unclear exactly how, other than to kind of just eliminate them, I guess. And we are going to expand some supportive measures for automakers, including relaxing some of the range requirements for plug-in hybrids, and increasing credits for automakers to sell ZEVs, at least. Was not well received by the environmentalist.
No, I would imagine not. BC was kind of like way out on the forefront of a lot of this stuff, and it's annoying some of this got back because the wasn't some of the money for this from the carbon tax that we're no longer collecting, so there isn't the funds for the rebates.
Yeah,
it's annoying that, but like, I don't know. At the same time, the sales quotas, I don't know, never struck me as a great policy because, ultimately you need to consumers need to want to buy them, and you don't want to get a situation where the dealership basically has to turn people away because they haven't sold enough of a certain kind of car. So, I don't know. Wish we were pushing.
I do find, I bought a new EV this summer, and I found there was still a lot of demand for them. Like, the specific model we bought was brand new, Ioniq 9, and it was, flying off the shelves. So, I don't know. There's this, weird double side to it where I feel like the automakers themselves aren't actually having an issue, but it's like some dealerships are still... Because dealerships are a weird little cartel system that we permit to exist. You can't go to the car store, as it's been described. You have to go to this bizarre family dynasty business that has a license to sell.
Yeah.
So-and-so's.
Well, wasn't the original impetus for the dealership system to prevent vertical integration in the auto sector by making it so the sellers couldn't be the same people as the makers of it.
Then why can Tesla open their own dealerships? I don't know.
Well, I mean, Tesla kind of did the Uber thing and like spent a lot of time fighting jurisdictions about direct to consumer sales.
That's fair.
So,
I mean,
anyway, Tesla was right on that one, but like, yeah, the history of the whole car dealership system is one of those like cautionary tales about how you think you're doing something that's like pro-competitive and anti-monopoly, and you just end up creating a perverse system that just has monopolies and uncompetitive aspects in a different way.
On EVs themselves, as far as I can tell, Quebec is still maintaining its targets and its planned ban on the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles as of 2035. And otherwise, I guess we're just kind of hoping that the promises made to Elizabeth May will deliver a federal target for ZEV sales that will get BC back on the climate bandwagon that we've kind of just walked away from. It's weird, right? How BC was such a leader on so many, and under the BC Liberals at times, under the BC NDP at times, on so many issues on climate. And right now we're kind of just, well, we got to wait for Ottawa. Changing times. Let's move on because really we want to get to the budget.
A changing time situation. But we've gone long enough. We don't need to dive into that.
Some things haven't changed, though, and that's BC doesn't like Alberta pipelines.
Kind of?
So two things are on the story. The first story is the second one in our notes that I'll delve into first, is that Ottawa and Alberta are close to a deal that would include a new pipeline to the BC coast, according to some Globe and Mail sources. Basically, Mark Carney and Danielle Smith kind of getting along and suggesting that this could be a thing. BC still emphasizing we're not in support of repealing the North Coast tanker ban, so I don't know how your pipeline will work. And it also came out that this alleged deal has not involved any consultation with coastal First Nations who would be affected, which is not a great sign for the midterm success of such a project, given the opposition it will likely face if it's rammed down their throats. But they have talked to the BC Conservatives about it, according to John Rustad. He says he'll talk to anyone about anything. We don't need to delve into that. It was just a weird aside story.
It's a weird side story.
On the other side, BC has said we would support an increase to the capacity for the existing Trans Mountain pipeline to
the newer version of the existing Trans Mountain pipeline, not to be confused with their previous opposition to expanding it to its current state.
Yeah. It confuses me because as far as I can tell, all of this is being talked about against a background where Trans Mountain pipeline as it stands right now is not at full capacity. So
but it is projected fairly soon to hit that, I believe.
Is it?
There's a long runway on it.
So, I don't know. I'm so tired of pipeline politics.
That's never going away, though, I don't think. At least not in the next several decades. So basically, there's a proposal in place to do 3 modest scale improvements to the pipeline to increase the amount that it's transporting for a couple $2 billion. And Adrian Ditz and the BC government as a whole have basically signaled, they're kind of fine with this, and if anything, this is their preferred solution to the get more oil out of Alberta than the other pipeline proposals on the table.
Yeah, so this is different than the TMX project, which was basically twinning the pipe, right? Like it was building an entirely new pipe beside the old pipe. The largest optimization they say here would add 30 kilometers of new 36-inch diameter pipe alongside existing and make small improvements elsewhere. And then they would just put more pumps to be more efficient. And that would still cost $3 to $4 billion and take a few years, but presumably be significantly cheaper than an entirely new North Coast pipeline that doesn't exist, has no private backers, and is likely to face significant opposition all the way along. So I get why the BC government would come back and say, look, if you're desperate for oil capacity, you have a pipeline that exists and we can boost its capacity a bit. It'll require dredging a bit of the Burrard Inlet, but that was largely already planned as far as I know.
It had been talked about for quite a while, and I believe the BC government was moving ahead to support it, although being a navigable waterway in the ocean, that's ultimately the federal government's call on that one. But I believe, there'd been noises from the BC government indicating support for it. Basically, right now, the part of Burrard Inlet where the terminal is too shallow for the tankers to fully load down when they leave. So you dredge it, you can actually just get more per tanker through.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
It's interesting. The most interesting thing is just how different this is from the previous NDP's opposition to the pipeline, where they really came out swinging against the original twinning of the pipeline.
It's very funny to make Adrian Dix come out and say he supports this after he was the one who did that flip-flop.
Yeah, and they lost at the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court basically said, you're a province. You don't get to decide federal projects, and basically you can't add in a bunch of extra requirements above and beyond what the federal government has decided is regulatorily appropriate. So that was ultimately the conclusion of the whole TMX fight. Was these are Ottawa decisions, not BC decisions. But it is interesting that the politics of that have changed somewhat, where the NDP feel comfortable taking this position.
Yeah. Polling's kind of been all over the place. Polling in BC for pipelines is more supportive now than it was 5-10 years ago, undoubtedly. Among the NDP base, I haven't looked closely recently, but I suspect it's still not popular.
No, if I remember, last polling I think I looked at on this was back in the spring, I want to say, and if I recall, there was something like 55-60% supportive of a pipeline, but there were pretty strong regional and party differences on that. So I expect the Metro Vancouver and Victoria base of the NDP are going to be pretty strongly polarized against, where your softer swing voters in the suburbs are going to be much more open to it. But that might be fine for the electoral aspects of it, but it's going to make it a nasty fight inside the party.
Speaking of nasty fights, the budget vote came and went this past week with all of the drama you could hope for from, a narrow parliamentary vote, except for we didn't get the speaker breaking a tie. That's the only way it could have been.
Well, I mean,
any better.
The most dramatic was they could have lost the thing and we'd be in an election right now.
Yeah, fine.
But much like the first story we talked about, was it Wells's first rule of Canadian politics once again reigned supreme, and the least exciting outcome happened of no election?
It seemed fairly likely that the budget would pass, right? The Liberals were confident, and none of the opposition parties were like, damn, let's go to an election, except the Bloc, who exist to be that voice in Parliament, and I love them for it, even if I dislike them for other reasons. But in this instance, the Liberals were able to pass their budget with the support of Elizabeth May, who reportedly disliked the budget, but was given assurances by Mark Carney that Canada is still committed to its Paris climate targets. How apparently didn't matter to her at all. Like, oh, he said, we'll reach them. Cool. I'll vote for this budget that contains no climate initiatives or like trivial ones. It's incredible.
Yeah, easiest I have ever. Does Elizabeth May really think she'd get like a binding commitment out of Carney over this one?
I don't know. She probably heard from her constituents or just decided herself that she didn't want to go to an election or from her party. But, she used the smokescreen of that promise instead of just saying outright, I've heard from Canadians, they don't want an election right now. So I am holding Mark Carney's feet to the fire to get this. But no, it's just vague pledge. The NDP was actually up last to vote, technically. So the Conservatives voted and 4 were missing on the initial vote. Shannon Stubbs, who had just had jaw surgery and was recovering and unable to vote electronically as the facial recognition software could not recognize her. And also, she just had surgery, so fair enough. As well as Matt Jeanneret, the MP who had announced he's quitting, and he's apparently quitting real fast, at least quiet quitting. So that those 2 was already enough for the budget to pass, with Elizabeth May voting for it. As well, Andrew Scheer and Scott Reid were not able to vote at first, and then it came to the NDP and Laurie Idlett and Gord Johns, the NDP MPs from Nunavut and part of Vancouver Island. Johns represents
Port Alberni riding,
right? That
I can't remember its current name, but the one that covers Port Alberni and Tofino in that area.
Yeah, kind of Central Island area. So that gives plenty of abstentions. Right after the NDP finishes their vote, at least the 5 of them who did, Andrew Scheer and Scott Reid show up and say, hey, we had technical difficulties. We'd like to vote against the budget now, please. And the speaker says, fine. And it comes out on social media images suggesting they were, quote, hiding behind a curtain, waiting to see how the vote would turn out. Because if the NDP didn't abstain and Elizabeth May voted against the budget, the Conservatives would have needed 4 MPs to not vote for the budget to pass. And so somehow he's not confirmed, and he says he did have legitimate technical issues and had a meeting just before and literally had to run to, the chamber to vote. But somehow Andrew Scheer drew the straw, allegedly or seemingly, to be one of the guys who would abstain, which is the funniest thing.
This is so weird. It makes them look silly, first of all, but also, I don't know, maybe there's something going on in the background where they don't want to go to an election, but I don't know if all everyone's concerned about is leadership of keeping the team together. Going to election is probably, if anything, going to help that, because everybody suddenly becomes focused on winning the election more than internal party squabbles. But even if they didn't want to go, just have them miss the vote. Don't do this weird thing of kind of miss it, then actually show up once it looks safe.
It's rather embarrassing.
It's not going to matter because none of these things are ever remembered more than a week after they happened, but particularly by voters living outside the Ottawa bubble. But
voters in Stubbs' riding have apparently been harassing her for missing the vote, which is uncouth, to say the least. I don't know how voters in Scheer or Scott Reid's ridings feel, but I guess they did manage to lodge their votes against. I think we've seen enough stories that the Conservatives have hinted they don't want an election, or at least some in there. And I think their worst case scenario is if they went to an election and Carney pulled out a full majority, like a clear majority. Poilievre would be hooped. He'd have to quit then, blew 2 elections in a row, and they'd be listless. So I think they're kind of hoping maybe in 6 to 12 months, they can kind of reset their internal, have their leadership convention. Poilievre survives, has a clear, 82% safe margin, and they can settle the base, refocus. By then, the sheen has worn off Carney, and they can launch a new push to bring the government down then. And I don't think that's the worst strategy for them, because there's a lot of risk if they went right now.
I mean, it's not the worst strategy, assuming they can right their ship and correct some of the challenges, which there isn't much evidence of right now. If anything, they've gotten themselves into a worse spot than they were 6 months ago. And, Poilievre has a bunch of strengths, but being adaptable when a new style of politics is called for and a new approach is not one of his strengths.
And for the NDP's part, turns out they didn't need to have anyone miss the vote, unfortunately for them. But, they don't get to be blamed for an election. So they trundle on leaderless, and eyes turn to their leadership race now, I guess, which we have nothing on this week, but eventually we'll get into that. I think they have a debate coming up soon.
Yeah, they have a debate coming up, and I think didn't the deadline just pass for signing up?
Yeah, the first deadline of having your deposit and signatures in, and all 5 of the approved candidates met both of those requirements. I think the official deadline to join the race is technically in January, but I think if you do that, I don't know how it works with your signatures and deposit. You probably have to put them up right away. It's confusing. It only matters to possibly one person in Canada.
But he's honestly not worth talking about till there's actually something newsworthy happening there about either getting accepted or getting booted out for numerous possible reasons.
Mm-hmm. And someone booting themselves out of the country is Chrystia Freeland, who has announced she's going to take on the new job as CEO of the Rhodes Trust in London, England.
The one that handles the Rhodes scholarships?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't perpetuate the colonial racism of the namesake of the Rhodes Scholarship and Cecil Rhodes.
Unfortunate namesake, still a very prestigious organization.
Mm-hmm.
The more interesting thing is, didn't she have a different job lined up?
She still has a job, Scott. She's an MP. And in addition to that, is a parliamentary secretary, as you're alluding to Ukraine stuff.
Yeah, the special envoy, was it not? For that, and yeah, that seems to have just fallen by the wayside. It never seemed particularly well defined. Not the reporting we were digging through before we started recording really had any indication, what the budget was, what the deliverables were, any of that stuff. It was all vague and basically seemed to be there to give a face-saving way to depart cabinet. But I guess that's no longer of interest. The Rhodes Foundation confirmed to the Globe and Mail that this is a full-time job, so it's not like there's going to be a lot of spare time to do Ukraine envoy stuff. And
I'm pretty confident you can't vote remotely from out of the country as an MP.
Is that the case? Didn't Michelle Rempel-Garner spend a decent amount of the pandemic in, was it like Kansas or something? One of the Oklahoma, one of the central states.
Yes, but I think she just was absent.
I thought she was voting from there, but no. If that is the case, or if that isn't the case where you have to be in country to do the remote voting, it ought to be a rule at least.
Yeah. So I guess she'll be, like, we haven't been told she's resigning. Apparently she hasn't done an interview in months. She put out 1 or 2 press releases about the Ukraine envoy position that, like she's helping businesses work with the Ukrainian government, and she's been invited on, presidential visits to Ukraine, and that's all we know. The Conservatives have put in questions and gotten answers that contradict statements given by staff from the Privy Council office to parliamentary committees, where the written answers say there's no formal support from Privy Council office to her role, and then the staff say, sometimes we help her out, and it's like, not helpful. No one knows what she's doing. But I guess at least as CEO of Rhodes Trust, it's a very clear and defined role, and congrats, I guess.
Yeah, it's a fairly prestigious position to get. Good on her for getting it, and I guess this probably marks the end of the brief Ukraine envoy role and kind of the real exiting out of politics and government.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.